Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will from Starhearth Astrology, and I'm here today to talk about the energies and the astrological dynamics of the Scorpio new moon, which takes place on November 14th. It actually kind of straddles dates depending on where you are in the US. It is the 14th at mountain on the mountain time zone, but I believe it is the 15th if you're on Eastern time. So there's a little bit of a wiggle there just from where the exact moment of the new moon falls. So as with all new moons, we are renewing the lunar month. The week leading up to the new moon is typically lower energy. We're releasing stuff. We're lower in productivity. Our kind of focus gets pulled inward. And that's a really potent way to work with the lunar month, is to pay attention to which quarter we're in. So leading up to it, we pull inward in preparation for the renewal of the new moon. Now, this is an interesting new moon for a number of reasons. You know, it's by no means like the biggest deal that has ever happened in astrology ever, right? It's a Scorpio new moon, and we get them once a year, and every once in a lot of years we would get possibly two. But this one does kind of, it's a development of the stories that are currently going on. So by that, I mean, on the one hand, this is the next lunation after the Halloween full moon conjunct Uranus, which could have been disturbing in people's charts. And so this is kind of the last 2 weeks saw the resolution of that, or at least some form of closure around those themes. And this lunation starts the next 2 weeks until the Gemini full moon that happens on November 30th, which is an eclipse. And so that brings us into eclipse season. So this Scorpio new moon is the final lunation before we head into a month of eclipse season. So there's a piece of it that is the calm before the storm a little bit. But it also holds its own. And the reason for that is that just the day before this new moon, we have Mars stationed direct. And that's a big deal. Mars has been retrograde since September 9th. So about 9.5 weeks of Mars retrograde. It stations direct, and then we get a new moon in Mars's sign of Scorpio. So there's this way in which, even though Mars was retrograding through Aries, it still rules Scorpio. So Scorpio topics have been on pause a little bit, or the topics of wherever Scorpio falls in your chart. And then in addition to Mars's retrograde, we've also had Mercury retrograde in the sign of Scorpio and into Libra. Well, now Mercury is back in Scorpio on the 14th, and Mars has stationed direct the day before. So everything that we learned, that we noticed, that we reevaluated from the retrogrades of Mars and Mercury, they get this kind of this point in time where we can reflect on that and change course and sow the seeds of those lessons so that they can grow into the habits or the changes that our reflection has prompted us to work on. And so we can kind of start moving forward again. We won't see necessarily the fruits of that labor. It doesn't happen super fast, but right, we're coming into consolidating what we learned from the Mars and the Mercury retrogrades, especially as it pertains to where Scorpio falls in your natal chart. So we have this moment where we can pause on those things, and even holding those lessons in our minds without actually doing anything about them, because Mars just stationed. So Mars is basically stopped in the sky. So even though he's not retrograde anymore, he's not moving forward very quickly. And so it's going to take a few days, a few weeks for him to pick up speed again. And as he picks up speed, that inertia will pull the action from us. So even just sitting with the ideas and what we've learned in the sometimes frustrating nature of retrogrades is that changes us, and that changes the world around us, because we see it differently. Just by being in the world, we change the world. And just by acknowledging whatever the Mars retrograde was about for you, whatever the Mercury retrograde might have been about for you, changes the way that you are in the world. And so that's really what this new moon holds space for. Yeah, so that said, let's hop into looking at the chart of the new moon and kind of seeing what are some of the dynamics that we can expect for the next 2 weeks, because new moons and full moons are these points of time that kind of catalyze different themes and storylines based on what is active during the new moon and the full moon. And those storylines evolve over the next 2 weeks. So when we look at the chart is set for where I am. So the ascendant might be different based on where you are, but none of the planets are going to move too much. So all of these dynamics are here. The most exact aspect that we get to the new moon itself, which you can see the sun and the moon down here at 23 degrees of Scorpio, is a sextile to Jupiter and Pluto, which are very close. They actually perfected the third of their conjunctions on November 12th. So we've got November 12th, the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, and then November 13th, Mars stations direct, and then November 14th or 15th, depending on your time zone, we have a Scorpio new moon. So, and this dynamic is kind of the hairiest part of this, I think, because those Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions have really coincided with peaks in COVID, at least in the United States. And so we're seeing kind of, depending on where you are, new situations of lockdowns, more mask mandates, really kind of dire circumstances in terms of hospitalizations and the health of hospital workers, and schools being shut down as well. So having a new moon in aspect to Jupiter and Pluto, which currently can be signifying the expanse of COVID, is a little bit worrisome, just because new moons are about beginnings and they grow too. So I think we might see over the next 2 weeks some pretty difficult situations with COVID. Of course, the next 2 weeks also contain Thanksgiving. We're going to be having a different kind of Thanksgiving than we have had in the past. I actually just uninvited my family for Thanksgiving, and so having that kind of in full isolation. And I imagine that a lot of people are kind of in the same boat of not traveling and not connecting with people because of how this virus is spreading. And I think that we will see a lot of some big impacts. You know, we've been watching it spread, but the hospitalizations and the deaths always lag behind a little bit. But I think these could be a difficult couple weeks with regards to that, based on that aspect. Now, the other aspects are relevant even if they don't directly aspect the sun or the moon in this lunation, because, as I said, the chart kind of gives the potentiality for the storylines that play out over the next 2 weeks. So obviously the chart contains more more dynamics. And so I think ones that we have to look out for, first of all, we have Venus approaching a square to Pluto almost exact in the chart, followed by a square to Jupiter, and then she will go on to square Saturn. And so that is something that we literally have in the next 2 weeks. She'll move through those squares until she fully separates from them when she goes into Scorpio, which she does on November 21st. But she's pushing through some difficult territory. And this is, the broken record of planets in cardinal signs right now, and especially the second half of cardinal signs. So that is Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, is that they come into hard aspect with kind of these big three players in Capricorn that have really characterized this year for a lot of people. And so here again, we have our relationship dynamics having to go through kind of this gauntlet of Pluto and then Jupiter in its fall and then Saturn in its rulership. Now, hopefully what's happening, is hopefully we can receive as a gift the reality check of these squares. Hopefully Venus in Libra with her creativity can respond creatively to the tension being put on here. And the way that she's getting kind of pinched to deal with this. And part of that, that square of Venus to these, to all this Capricorn might be not having a Friendsgiving, not traveling for Thanksgiving, really feeling that sense of isolation when we're entering the fall and we're entering the holiday season and we want to be closer to people. And so that can put that strain on Venus and Libra that craves that connection. Now, Venus square Pluto is a dangerous dynamic as well. It can mean that relationships experience kind of this like life or death feeling, huge charge around it. Old trauma can come up around that dynamic. You can also be dealing with kind of shady power dynamics with Venus square Pluto. So just being aware that can be something that we see. And also Scorpio deals explicitly with power dynamics. And so this is kind of, this is when the sun is really looking at those topics, and it's potentiated here in this chart. Now we also have Mercury working into an opposition with Uranus. Now, this is the third of 3 oppositions that were part of Mercury retrograde. Mercury opposed Uranus on October 7th, October 18th, and then the final one perfects on November 17th. So a couple days after this new moon. And that is shocking revelations, changes in plans. It can also, on the positive side, it can be inspiration. It can be upgrades in technology. It can be that real juice of changing your mind about something. And with Uranus in Taurus, that might be about what we value. And so, Mercury in Scorpio kind of piercing the surface of things and then getting these jolts from Uranus about the way that things really are. I think the obsession and the focus that are the real gifts of Mercury and Scorpio can also lead to these kind of blind sides from the obvious, Uranus and Taurus. So that is there as well. So we've got that. We've got shocking revelations. We have the tension of Venus squaring all of the Capricorn planets. We've got the new moon sextile to the Pluto-Jupiter conjunction that are all working. We also have as I said before, Mars moving forward again. So as Mars moves forward, it is going to come into kind of build towards those squares with those Capricorn planets. So we might, we're not done with that tension of the will feeling like it's being oppressed. And I think we'll see more of that. And looking at the political situation, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, people are angry and they're afraid that their voices are not going to be heard, and they're afraid of the world that they're losing. So I think we can see some kind of outbursts. Of course, the first square that Mars is working towards is the one with Pluto, which can be quite explosive. So so still a lot of tension in this new moon, and then building up towards an eclipsed full moon on November 30th. But that is the topic for another video. So I hope you use this time to integrate the lessons from the 2 retrogrades that we just went through, to reconnect to your personal power. If you're feeling really depleted, you're certainly not alone. And responding to that is, pulling in your energy, decide what's really worth getting stressed out over, putting your energy into, worrying about, and then what do you need to do to take care of yourself, so that you can show up to your life in a robust way, and so that your actions demonstrate what you value. Okay, happy new moon, all my best. You can hit like on this video, and that would make me super happy. And subscribe if you want to see more of this content. I also have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for on my website if it's easier for you to read this stuff than listen to my Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, sometimes quite verbose discussions of it. And you can also find me on social media. I'm Whitney Will from Star Hearth Astrology. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.